and welcome to What Goes Around. My name is still Eamon Murtaugh.
And my name is still Deb Grant. Hello.
Hello, and that's good news, Deb. Welcome back. Listen, what's on the show this week?
This week we've got an interview with the brilliant Wesley Doyle, who's written a book called Some Bizarre, all about bizarre records.
And not only that, we've also got the fabulous John Robb talking about the art of darkness, the history of goth. We also have some builders in.
We also have some builders in, as you can hear. Getting quite intimate with the builders here. I have a feeling they're literally just on the other side of my studio window, probably listening to everything I say, so they're getting a nice preview of what's happening. Also, Eamon Murtaugh in conversation with the lovely Jason Williamson of Sleaford Mods. I wasn't present for that interview, but I did hear it was absolutely lovely.
He is, for a man who swears for a living and scares the bejesus out of most people, he was one of the nicest people I've ever talked to. What a lovely, down-to-earth chap. You're going to love it. It's going to be great. We should pod right now.
I think we should. Let's not hesitate. Let's get into it.
No hesitation. Pod it, pod it.
Eamon Murtaugh, it's so nice to be back in your audio company again, and I would really like to know what goes around.
Well, first things first, Deb. We are 50.
Whoa, hang on a second.
Yeah.
That feels premature.
No, you're not actually 50.
Oh, phew.
You're getting there, baby. You're getting
fuck
there.
off. How dare you?
Hey, listen, I'm already there. It's cool. But we, as a duo, a dynamic duo in the podcasting world, are 50. This is our 50th episode, babe.
It's crazy. I can't believe that. Look at us now. From acorns, what's the thing? Mighty oaks.
Mighty oaks, yeah. Jesus, we got
Just
leaves,
craggy
we
old
got
oaks.
squirrels living us, you got birds on our branches, insects crawling around our legs. I pushed this metaphor too far. But yeah, we are old, wizened oaks with 50 pods in our back catalogue. Isn't that nice?
It's amazing.
Yeah.
What, I have to ask you this. Favourite episode, favourite moment?
There have been a few. I'm legally obliged to say, I can't decide. It's so tricky. But I'm gonna give you 3 moments that I don't think I'll ever forget.
Okay.
Out of the 50, I don't think I'll ever forget talking to Labby Sifri.
I was going to say the exact same thing.
That was just brilliant. And what the listeners don't know is before we talked to Labby Sifri, and we were nervous because Labby's, he's a ledge.
And he doesn't suffer fools as well, which is always a terrifying prospect.
Sharp as a pin, and really, he's on it. But the thing is, we hooked up with him, and he's like 70 something, isn't he? He's probably even more, maybe, not sure. But he had technical problems, and so for the first 40 minutes, this world superstar was under his desk pulling out wires, and all we could hear was Labby swearing like quietly under his breath, and we were like, "Oh God, this is not going to go well now, is it?" And then, just erudite and funny and really just wisdom, pure wisdom. That's what he gave us.
Dropping wisdom bombs all over the place. But yes, I'll never forget the sound of him. Oh, blast! Does this connect to this one? What the fuck does it? Yeah, that was very entertaining and just something that I won't forget anytime.
And when the red light went on, he was just on the money. Do you know what I mean?
Absolute showbiz pro.
Fantastic.
And it was great conversation as well. If you haven't listened to that episode, go back and listen. Go through our vast archive of 50 episodes and listen to the Labby Sifri episode. Sorry, I do have the builders in at the moment. There's a lot of crashing and banging.
Well, you've got builders, I've got builders.
On. Yeah.
And because we both got builders at either end, it's going to be kind of a stereo effect.
I should have just blamed you, actually.
Yeah. But look,
the builders in.
Good thing for the listeners is that we're recording all the intros in one day, so for the next 3 episodes you're just going to get builders. We like to plan ahead like that. So 2 more quick points. I won't try and hog all the good stuff. I'll let you pick some good stuff as well. For me, I think the one where we came of age as a pod, and it was because of your friend who wanted to talk about noise music, and I remember making the little piece about noise music and just thinking, that is the oddest 10 minutes I think anyone will ever hear on a podcast. And, if you listen to it on headphones, it's quite a trip. And I remember thinking, we're making something there, so that was good.
It's a beautiful piece. Dr. Stephen Graham. He's also written a book about noise music, yeah.
Has he? Oh, well, we should get him on to talk about that.
Yes. It came out a while ago. I'm kind of bored of talking to him about it, to be honest.
Sosdoc. That's the one. And I think perhaps just, like my final pick will actually be a real up-to-date one, because when we started the podcast was the one guest I really wanted to get on were the Sleaford Mods, because I just thought they are so singular in their sound and they've got so much to say and they're so absolutely painfully funny. They would be the best guests ever. And we hunted them down like a lion on the wilds of Kenya. Oh, if there are lions in Kenya, I'm not even sure. It isn't really what I meant. Like, we didn't hunt. We're not into hunting.
It's out there now.
Oh, God. All I've got, I've sat in my hut in my back garden and I've just got like loads of shields on the wall with heads of Labby Sifri and Lydia Lunch and all these people. All the ones I've taken down. 49 of the bastards.
Yeah, notice we haven't heard from him in a while.
But Jason Williamson finally deigned to talk to me, and what a lovely chap he was. Funny and friendly and just, great guest. Well worth the wait. What about you?
Well, you put me on the spot now. I would say, well, had you not Bagsied it, I might have said Labby Sifri too. Also, just the fact that, like, I think Labby is quite discerning in terms of who he does interviews with. And I think he was quite considered of the fact that he decided to do one with us. So that was very flattering in the first place. And then, yes, to spend so much time in his company while he flustered around under this desk, plugging stuff in and unplugging stuff. I mean, I was just, it was nice that he gave us so much of his time. I would say, similarly to how you were saying Dr. Stephen Graham's piece about noise sort of, really made us feel established as a podcast. I really, really loved our interview with Marcus Brigstock.
Same episode.
Same episode. Yeah, so it was kind of like, as a whole piece, that was like, the first, I probably said this before, but like, that was kind of like a real moment for this podcast. But it was such a beautiful interview. He was he really dug deep and really kind of, the concept of phonographic memories is, songs which are attached to specific memories of your life. And he gave us this beautiful timeline of his teenage years and all the music that kind of soundtracked it. And it was just such a brilliant, honest interview. I love that.
Yeah, that really was special, wasn't it? And it takes a lot to... he could have just come on and gone, blah, 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 I'm a comedian, I like this song, I like that song. And he didn't. He really opened his heart. And I don't really think we were even expecting it to come out like that. And it was lovely. So thanks, Marcus.
Yeah, what a gem he is. Lovely man. Also, I have to say, our very first episode was Wrong Time. Because that was fun. I just have memories of, of weeping with laughter in the studio to some of his anecdotes. He was such a perfect guest. And it's good because, sometimes with podcasts, you go back to the first episode and it's all a bit shonky. You might have random banging in the background, for example. Yeah,
the builders might be in again.
That kind of unprofessional thing. But because our first episode was with Wrong Tom and it was so funny and so engaging, I still feel very proud of that episode, even though it was we were still kind of finding our feet.
He's a top man. Top man. He came down to play for me.
Did he? Came to Bristol?
Yeah.
No way.
A lovely evening. Yeah.
Oh, cute.
We climbed Disco Mountain together and he was an absolute joy.
Gorgeous.
And a real pro.
That's amazing. Oh, good.
Have you got one more special WGA memory for us?
Oh, have I?
Well, because I did 3, so you got to do 3. I'm not letting you skimp away with just 2.
I hated everything else that happened.
You got to mention Lydia.
Lydia Lunch.
She was...
Yeah, that was amazing. She was like someone, because I followed her for such a long time and I had her, and she's another one who I think is quite considered in terms of what she does. I somehow persuaded her to come on the podcast, and she was just exactly like filthy, raunchy, full of amazing stories. That accent of hers was just brilliant. Just like... Yeah. Also, I mean, it's hard because we're getting into territory of favorite guests now.
Who's your favorite child? I don't like Timmy anymore. Timmy can go. Sophie, with me.
I really loved your mate, the football man. He was also very generous.
Pat Nevin. Yeah, he was great.
He almost made me interested in football, at least for the time we were speaking to him. But like, also I thought it was amazing to talk to someone who you know, was obviously so skilled in one area, but his real passion was music, but yet he happened to be good enough at football to be a professional footballer. That was fascinating.
Yeah,
so many memories, Eamon. And also just spending quality time with you, because, you know, you're not my neighbour anymore. You're in Bristol now, and I feel like it's just, you know, who else do I get to spend hours at a time chatting away to?
BFFs, that's what we are, you know. I'll always be here at the end of this microphone for you, babe. For you.
Thank you.
Now, one other thing that we should quickly mention, which is, yes, this is our 50th episode, the big 50. After 3 years of doing it, right, we've still only got 49 Apple reviews. For God's sake, somebody out there must have an Apple account. Get us up to 50. I've had enough of this. We've asked about 3 times.
Come on. Even if you've already written us a review, just write us another one. I love how it was like, because we got a flurry of reviews at the beginning when we were giving away a WGA left-handed mug.
She stopped giving away the mugs. That was it. It was like everyone's going, oh, well, what are you paying us, bitch?
Yeah.
Well, we'll get some more mugs made, maybe. Now we're on 50. We'll see if we can get some merch out there, shall we?
That would be good.
Listen, 50, but the work is not done. Let us commence. Let us pod on, because we've got some big, big shows to do, and the mods, and a lovely book to talk about. So we'll move on swiftly, shall we?
Let's go.
Record labels get a bad rap, often with good cause. Bad deals, disruptive interference, and ridiculous marketing rank high on the list of complaints by artists and punters alike. But some labels are every bit as important and influential as the artists themselves. Someone has to find the new music, package it and sell it, and sometimes that product could only be pushed by an independently minded organisation because it's just too far out there for the mainstream to even conceive of. This is why boutique labels like Factory, Rough Trade and Mute are worth their weight in gold. Wesley Doyle has written an authoritative account of one of these seminal labels, Some Bizarre. Some Bizarre brought us some of the most unique and challenging artists of the 1980s, including The, Soft Cell, Cabaret Voltaire, and the delightfully named Scraping Fetus Off the Wheel. They were all presented to the world by Some Bizarre's maverick leader, Steve-O Pierce. So we're very happy to talk to Wesley about his upcoming book, Conform to Deform, which is out on February 14th. And it's all about the trials and tribulations of Steve-O and his magnificent Some Bizarre record label. Welcome to What Goes Around, Wesley.
Hi, Em. Thanks for having me on.
And for those that don't know, Some Bizarre were an independent record label kind of at the start of the 80s.
The sort of compilation album, which kind of made their name straight off the bat, came out in the beginning of 1981. So that was January 1981. So, yeah, I mean, that first compilation album had just unsigned bands, lots of who never troubled anyone's door ever again. But 5 of the bands were The, Soft Cell, Blancmange, B-Movie and Depeche Mode. And it was the first time any of those bands had appeared on any label of any sort. It was their first released music.
What fascinates me about Some Bizarre is how individual it is. It needed to be one person's taste. Do you know what I mean? I don't think anyone else really would have picked up these acts. But, you know, if you can put out your first compilation and have 5 incredible acts like that, all unsigned, you must have an ear for things.
Steve-O, as I've found out, is a very unique and interesting, that's a good word to use, character. I mean, basically, he left school unable to read or write properly. He had a speech impediment, made it very difficult to communicate. And he was one of those kids who, you know, was just thrown into a job the first chance the school had to get rid of him. So he ended up being a delivery boy for Phonogram. So he had a sort of a sort of tenuous connection to the music industry, and he was a DJ. So he would play places like Chelsea Drugstore and Billy's, which was then starting to play electronic music and have these kind of Bowie nights. And yeah, he just basically, his modus operandi was to kind of like take music that nobody had heard of and play it to people, to introduce them to this new type of music that he was listening to, and also to make the experience of listening to it as difficult as possible. So
I love that. So some of the stories you touch in the book and stuff, like stories about him basically deliberately clearing dance floors with electronic bombs and doing things like playing several tracks at once just for the cacophony of it. Do you know what I mean? And
also playing sooty albums as well.
Yeah, and Mickey Mouse into Cabaret Voltaire at arm speed. Right, yeah. That sort of, I mean, I've taken some DJ risks, but I don't think I'm not in his level. You know,
you should try it. I mean, it really was. You know, I mean, obviously, like people these days will talk about Aphex Twin playing Sandpaper or something like that, but it wasn't, sort of that different what he was doing back then. But I think, like, the weird thing about Steve-O is that it's innate. I don't think he never sat down and thought, this is my plan, this is what we're going to do. He basically felt that stuff like Throbbing Gristle, Cabaret Voltaire, Clock DVA, Fad Gadget, he felt that they were as commercial as stuff like Lake Human League, Duran Duran, Spandau Ballet. He really didn't see a difference. So he just wanted to, his whole thing was that if people could hear this music, then they would make up their own mind. Not everyone would get it. Some people wouldn't like it, but, some people would. And he didn't see why, these bands shouldn't have the opportunity to reach as many people as possible. And that was kind of the basis of Some Bizarre. He found these left field artists, these kind of weirdos, misfits, and put them on major labels and said to the public, okay, make your own mind up.
It was really far out there. The bands didn't look like bands and they didn't sound like anything that had gone before. And again, it's this one person's taste that really pushed that sound through. And, Soft Cell might have been the sort of tip of the iceberg, but underneath there's all this other stuff going on. One of my favourite albums of all time is Soul Mining. And it was interesting when I went to see the in Brixton on their last tour. He was chatting away at one point and he said, you're all having a good night or whatever, blah, blah, blah. And then he's saying, I always liked, coming out of the venue really sweaty. I always considered a dance band. Now, I'd said that before and people had looked at me funny, but they were a synthesizer band. They had drum machines, all that sort of thing, These bands that were being picked up, Steve-O was finding a niche for them or creating a niche for them in a way that no one else was ever going to do.
I think as well, like Tainted Love was like this golden ticket for him, really. Like labels being labels, they see something that's successful and they want a sort of another half a dozen of the same thing. So, he had the industry's ear for a very long time, even through into the 90s,
For a guy who left with no qualifications and, seemingly no hope, in his own words, the school just thought he would never go past the dole queue. He was a failure before he'd even gone out into the world. But for someone with that kind of background and qualifications, he cut some mean deals. He took on big music industry and really played them at their own game. He sold the other album to 3 separate companies on 3 different occasions. Tell us a little bit about how Some Bizarre just rubs the whole industry up the wrong way. Really.
Well, I think interestingly, what he used to do, which I think is something a lot of legacy artists do now. You think of people like, I don't know, Paul Weller, Nick Cave, Damon Albarn. They own the means of production now. So they make their records and then they shop it out to whichever label offers them the best deal. And that's what Steve-O was doing back in the early to mid 80s. He was recording the albums, like the Crackdown by Cabaret Voltaire. He got them down to London, got them in Trident with Flood, gave them a couple of weeks studio time, and they made the Crackdown. And then he took it out and, shopped it to all the major labels, and then Virgin picked it up, and the Cabs signed to Virgin, and with Some Bazaar as management and ident. So that was kind of how he was doing it. He had the stuff and people wanted it, and he was just going in and selling it to the highest bidder. I mean, again, I think that the whole thing with his education is kind of a bit of, it's a bit of a sort of misdirection, because he's still a smart guy, and he knew how to cut a deal. And it was almost like the stuff that he didn't understand, he felt he didn't need to know about, which in the long term didn't really serve him very well. But at the time, people were sort of like throwing stuff at him, and he was like, I don't need to know that. Do you want this album or not? This is how much money I want. Off we go.
I mean, the whole setup of his label, it just doesn't follow the normal route, does it? I loved the passage I was reading about his record label Office. Now, some record labels try and impress their clientele by installing a foosball table and maybe a drinks cabinet. But Some Bazaar's Office had a small chapel and a confession booth. I mean, that's kind of weird. Like I said at the start, it's such an individual trip he was on. His humour and his sort of agent provocateurness, really, without that, none of it would be possible.
No, I think it's it did crash and burn, and one of the things I was concerned about when I sort of was writing the book was how many of the artists would want to talk about Some Bazaar, because there's been a lot of disagreement about royalties and payments and ownership of copyright, which has led to quite a lot of rancour between quite a few of the artists, which is ongoing. But I think he, like Steve-O, created this playground for them to make really good art, which they wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. And I think even those who feel the most aggrieved by him would admit that, for a time, he made it possible for them to do what created their careers, I
mean, I love as well that, he seems to be one of these people that just throws out pearls of wisdom. He's almost like a preacher sometimes when he's talking about the music he's done. And I, as a kid, I can remember really distinctly turning the Soul Mining album over and seeing the little quote at the end on the other side which said, "With every kick in the face and every hurdle you pass, the rewards get greater, Steve-O." And I was looking at it, I was going, who the fuck is Steve-O? Do you know what I mean? Matt Johnson, okay, I get that. Zeki Manu, I know he played the drums. Who's the Steve-O guy? What does he do? He did have just this messianic sort of drive behind him. He wanted to tell the world, all about himself, his beliefs, and what he liked.
It's hard to find a comparison. It was his thing. I mean, it was he chose the bands. He signed the bands. He did the deals, and in his mind, it makes total sense. I mean, there's a famous incident for Neubauten's third album. In 1987, they did a show at the Kilburn National, and they were supported by Shiwaddy Waddy.
Fantastic.
And that was, sort of Steve-O chose, sort of book Shiwaddy Waddy to go on before Neubauten. And, you look at the music press at the time in the book, there's, some contemporary reviews from like the Stud Brothers, and they're decrying this, massive situationist prank, which is how they perceive it, and, look at it as this sort of Dada-esque thing that Steve-O's decided to put together to try and make everyone look stupid and, make things as difficult for people as possible. But Steve-O's take on it was like, who wouldn't want to see Neubauten come on after Shiwaddy Waddy?
Yeah. It sounds like a delightful evening's entertainment to me.
Yeah, and I think, and apparently, I spoke to Dave Bartram from Shiwaddy Waddy for the book, and he said they went down really well. Mm-hmm. And he couldn't quite believe it himself, but he said the audience had a really good time, and then Neubauten came on, and they had a really good time watching Neubauten as well. So, in Steve-O's mind, it made sense. And, you know, for a lot of the time, it made sense out in the real world as well.
How did you find him on a person-to-person basis?
He was everything I could have hoped for and more, which was good for the book, but maybe not so good for my anxiety levels. Perhaps that's the best way of saying it. He's hard work, but I needed him to be in there. I mean, at one point, it looked like he didn't want to do it, and we were looking at how we could write the book without actually having him contribute, which I think could have worked, because he would have remained an enigma at the centre of this story. But eventually he did agree to talk, and I met up with him in London at a restaurant, and it was one of the hardest interviews I've ever done in my life. And I've interviewed some quite tough people, but it was really rewarding as well. And he is a kind of genius, I think.
There are times in your life when the most important thing about your music is where and which tribe it is associated with. From the first time I wielded my crimpers in anger, I knew I wanted to be a goth. There was something so alluring about the life in black, the clothes, the look, the morbid aggrandisement of death and darkness. And contrary to popular belief, being a goth was actually brilliant fun. And the uniform of leather jackets and winker pickle boots, well, they somehow helped me find my tribe. I've long since put down the crimpers, but I still feel like a goth at heart, and this is why I'm so excited to talk to musician, author and punk legend John Robb about his brilliant new book, The Art of Darkness, A History of Goth. Welcome to What Goes Around, John.
Hi, how are you? Okay, Eamon?
Deep dive and a proper look at the history of this movement. How did you get started on the project?
Well, I think firstly there have been other books, but they're mostly academic books, and Mick Mercer's done a couple of good books, which are like almost like encyclopedias, like A to Z of goth, which are really good to have. But I thought it's time for a pop culture book that kind of wrote a book that was beyond the genre in a sense, that people who weren't goths, I mean, it's for goths as well, of course, but you know the way John Savage did England's Dreaming, which he took punk and the Sex Pistols seriously, but not in a serious way. So it wasn't academic, it was actually very readable. But it actually explained why it was really good to people who probably didn't know why it was really good, and explained the depth of a culture to people who just see the surface, you know. So a lot of people, so quite a few interviews are done for this book so far. People are going, aren't goths, people just have black hair and black lipstick, and that's about as far as most people go, which is fair enough, because people haven't got time all day to think about every youth culture ever. But I'm trying to explain it's like an art form, really, something very artful about it, and there's a lot of depth to it, a lot of nuance, and also one of the other themes of the book was the idea that every generation reacts to its blues, whether it's Lord Byron writing, that night in Geneva with his little gang doing Frankenstein and Dracula, or romantic painters, or decadent poets. And it's a lineage, or Instagram influencers now who put up goth photographs but with no music in them. So it's all about the image and not the music. And all that's fascinating. It's just whatever technology to hand is reacts to the eternal feeling of melancholy, but also it doesn't drown in the melancholy, as you were saying a minute ago. It was actually really good fun as well. People had a really good time going to the clubs and dancing. Yeah,
exactly, and dressing up in funky clothes and just living out a little bit of the fantasy. I think it's interesting, to have someone actually look at the like you say, the pop culture side of it. But what are the roots of goth? Where before even the sort of label of the music came out? What were the things that were pointing towards this movement, do you think?
Well, if you do the deep dive, really, I mean, the book starts the fall of Rome, so we go back a little bit. So that was a Visigoths.
That's the right bloke, this question.
So this kind of notion in Europe that the Goths are responsible for the destruction of the classical Rome, so there was this sort of split in European thought, even from the year 411. So like when the Germans started building churches in the Middle Ages, the classical, because there's always that hankering after the classical, the pillars and the columns, which every city has. but it was this kind of sneering at German architecture for just being Gothic, like it was a bit of a lower thing. It was, it wasn't like the classical style, but the Germans embraced that, and so Gothic became a thing. It became an art form, and there's painting and books that sort of reflected this as well. So writing, literature, and all kind of arts reflected this kind of different style of thinking, and it became an art form on its own. And that kind of percolates around this idea of what Gothic actually is. And then in rock and roll terms, in post-war rock and roll culture, there's already kind of, it's very euphoric in the 60s, but there's a dark side to the 60s. So, I mean, the Rolling Stones Paint It Black, which obviously is not a goth song, but it's definitely a dark song. And then the first band to actually be called a goth band or a gothic band was The Doors. So when they played their first gig in New York City in 1967, the reviewers said they were gothic. And also this really fantastic quote where he said, they reflect America's fascination with violence back at itself, which I just love that quote. It's so good. And The Doors have all the themes set in place. You've got a baritone singer who, in a sense, is the Lord Byron of his time. He's got a poetic kind of style to his lyrics. He lives a very dissolute lifestyle, like a lot of the romantic poets did in the time, and he's dead at 27. It's almost perfect. Continues that kind of template, and then it's this. Then the Stooges and the Velvets, of course, the other two bands in the what I would call the unholy trinity. They kind of they open the door for a much darker kind of rock music with different kind of themes, lyrical themes, and then this accelerates through glam rock with Bowie and Bolan, and then through punk the doors are open literally and everybody gets in. So it kind of gets taken out of the big cities and given to everybody, and everybody who tried to interpret punk on their own terms interpreted it in completely different ways. So across in small towns and across the north of England, it was coming out as this kind of darker version, which a lot of Bowie, a lot of Jim Morrison in there, but also a lot of punk, and it all mixed together. And somehow, in that soup, you get like sort of the early days of a gothic subculture.
It's interesting you talk about Bowie there. I was actually looking through YouTube the other day, and I saw a little interview with him where he said, I did think about becoming, I won't do the impression, but I did think about becoming a goth for a while, or, expressing a goth side. But then I thought, if I did that, I'd have to spend all my time denying that I'm a goth. And I thought that was quite interesting.
Such a great quote. It's so funny.
It's so true as well, though, because there's so many, what I would term, gothic figureheads, people that, really kind of sum up what I thought of as a goth growing up, who really just cannot abide the label. You think of Andrew Eldritch and Susie, who much prefers to be called a punk, These sort of people. What is it about the gothic culture that some of the leading lights actually seem to want to stray away from it? It seems an odd thing.
I think what it was, the scene was already in place. It was in place for about 2 years, and then the words got dumped on it afterwards. And initially it was a bit of a piss take term, so obviously not going to embrace that. And I think also the problem that a lot of bands have, understandably, is that once you put into a scene, you can't get out of it. So that if you were Andrew Eldritch, you'd always be expected to wear black clothes. You wouldn't be allowed to, and of course he reacts against us by wearing a white suit, and then eventually start wearing his baseball outfit and his but still couldn't get out of it. And then musically you're not allowed to do certain things, which is completely ridiculous. Yeah. So, but I think in a sense, I think you have to look at all. The scene is definitely there. There are, there's thousands and thousands of people embracing a scene. And there's certain things about a scene that they really like, but you can't imprison the musicians into that scene. But at the same time, it does exist. It doesn't just because you don't want to be in it doesn't mean you're not in it. That's the problem. That's the problem all these people have. And I did interview Steve Sethern for the book, and he said he didn't really like the term goth because it made it, and he would spell it GOFF, that. But he liked the term gothic because there were a lot of gothic things that they really embraced, like Edgar Allan Poe, or even a sense like the soundtrack of Psycho, which they used to play to guitarists when they joined the band, say, make your guitar sound like this, So that kind of, there was a darkness at play in all these groups. Also a humour. I think people really object to the idea that they were just these really miserable, like people sat in a garage. they could be dark and funny at the same time, you know. And I think the trouble when you get something that's called goth, then it's just, oh, well, isn't that just black lipstick, black hair, and everyone's miserable? And people go, no, we're not miserable. We're having a great time, but we're also not. We're not backing off from the darkness. We're embracing the darkness.
Yeah, I mean, if you think that goth is totally humorless, go and see Alien Sex Fiend, because they're tremendous. They're absolutely hilarious. I'm doing time in a maximum security Twilight home and all that. I mean, you couldn't make it up really, and all that Batcave stuff. A lot of those bands were, they were, I wouldn't say tongue in cheek or taking the mickey, but they were aware of the kind of ludicrousness of what they were playing with. Do you know?
Yeah, and I think that's been true of everything. I mean, glam rock was the same, wasn't it? Bowie is incredibly serious, but also quite funny as well, quite dry, and it's in there, isn't it? It's much more nuanced, really. And what I tried to do in the book was unpack it, really, that it's more than just black lipstick, which is great on its own, as part of the whole thing. It's not the whole thing. But I had to explain in each chapter that this band absolutely hates being called a goth band, and this is why.
It's an interesting thing. It really is. I think you touched a little bit on this just as you were speaking there. Like, I find it really interesting when I was growing up that there was, to me, there was like two epicenters of gothness. There was Leeds, and then there was Camden Market. What was it particularly about? Because I felt like the London scene was, it felt, I don't know if it was later, but it felt later. What was it about the North, do you think, that embraced this? Is it just all to do with, Dracula being written for Whitby?
Well, even that Whitby thing came later, didn't it? I think it's just that curious thing that, I think the first thing is that Leeds did have the first club, didn't it? Which doesn't get the credit for. I mean, the Phono was before the Batcave, but the Phono wasn't in Soho, and it wasn't next to all the TV people going around Soho, so he didn't get on the television, did it? So it was, as ever, the narrative's always told from the big cities, isn't it? But I think what was one of the interesting things about goth, and quite a lot of all the other kind of bits of post-punk that came after the punk explosion, it was basically that generation who got really into punk, recreating it on their own terms. So a lot of goth would be like a northern version of punk, but with northern fascinations in it. So each city had its own kind of little vibe going on. So like in Liverpool, they were really into, not everybody, but a lot of the people in the scene were into West Coast California and psychedelic music, and that crisscrosses, doesn't it? It's a big Doors influence in Liverpool. Same in Manchester, really. When you look at Joy Division, you can see Bowie and the Doors in there. But Manchester was very dour and dressed down. But Leeds had this thing where they got really into rock and roll. So when that thing where everybody, like punk was it's year zero, we all hate rock music. Leeds, in a very fantastic, perverse Yorkshire way, embraced rock music, but through a post-punk lens. So it's kind of very knowing, and it's a Sister Mercy are initially almost like a parody of a rock band. It's kind of laughing at the pomposity and the stupidity of rock while doing it, but also in a very modern way. It wasn't, they were not, and they always say, like Eldridge likes to say, we're just a 70s rock band, but they weren't at all. They didn't sound anything like a 70s rock band, because for a start they had a drum machine, which very rarely used in rock music before. Just bands like Suicide had used them, Sly Stone had used one years and years ago. But in a kind of heavier kind of way, this is groundbreaking. I mean, rock bands didn't have drum machines in 1980 or whatever, And that became the very staple of the West Yorkshire scene, didn't it? Every band seemed to have a drum machine, but almost always the same drum machine going round the bands, blending it out.
Because it was Dr. Avalanche, wasn't it? It was always credited on the albums that were by Dr. Avalanche. So maybe Dr. Avalanche just got passed around a few different bands. But
I think Dr. Avalanche is obviously it's a different drum machine, but Dr. Avalanche is still in the Sisters of Mercy.
It's one of the few that survived. Goth culture really has endured, doesn't it? It's one of those ones that it just never goes away. Do you know what I mean? That every generation has their own take on it. How has it changed? Especially, I think we can see the look is kind of constant. The darkness and the black makeup and all this sort of stuff and the spiky hair. Those sort of things kind of endure. But the definition of a goth and the music which is classified as goth or said to have a gothy feel, that's changed quite a lot. How do you think the culture's changed musically?
I think I mean, it's all different scenes concurrent at the same time. And what the bands we're talking about, you know, the initial sort of goth bands are now called trad goth, which is such a great term, isn't it? Yeah. But they're still very important. They're still very central to the scene, you know. Like, so there's lots of big goth festivals across Europe, and they're always headlining them. You know, I mean, there's that one announced in LA, that Cruel World Festival. It's like, you know, Sisters of Mercy are playing and Susie's playing, and they're top of the bill bands, you know, and the newer bands like Soft Moon or whatever, they're lower down on the bill, and they haven't quite broken through to that level of the classics. But in the clubs, the music's quite different now, so you won't hear the bands as much. So if you go to like a European sort of whatever you would call a goth club now, or, you know, cold wave, dark wave, all the other terms, it's much more electronic music, you know. So it's, and in a sense, that thing the Sisters using the drum machine sort of played out in the end, that it's always become like goth techno in a sense, and the EBM is really key, and it's not about the band. So the dance floor is completely about the dance floor now, but people still like the old trad goth groups as well, who are now enormous. You know, you think bands like The Cure, you used to go to see and play to 300 people, now they're stadium bands. So in a sense, it's concurrent, isn't it? Those old bands are still very much the pillars of the scene, but there's also other different soundtracks kind of swirling around in the darkness as well.
And it is still, you know, it is still happening. I've got a friend who promotes around Doncaster, and he does this Black Midwinter Festival where he gets all like new goth bands basically. And like you say, a lot of them do seem to veer towards, you know, a more synthesized sound. But they, you know, there are a lot of them, and they are all kind of connected in this funny sort of way with this tradition of gothic music. But even though they're still at it, still doing it, they're changing, and they're writing their own history really, and that's great to see really.
Yeah, I think it's important, isn't it? I think you know, it's like every generation dealing with its blues in different ways. I mean, a lot of, like I said before, a lot of people aren't even in bands. You know, they're just on Instagram posting pictures of standing in misty forest, you know, with no music at all, you know, and that's totally valid as well, because it doesn't have to be a repeat of what was there 30, 40 years ago, does it? It can keep changing and keep morphing, you know. So there's goth games now in gaming, you know, and there's little bits of music in there, but they're actually just capturing the atmosphere, and the atmosphere is actually the key thing to this. So the art of darkness, actually, when you boil it all the way down, is the atmosphere. Whether you can apply that to a book, a film, a piece of music, a computer game, or an Instagram picture, it's actually the art of darkness is the key in the core of it.
Yeah, and so it makes a fantastic title for a brilliant book, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'll just write that down. Yeah.
So, listen, I mean, you're a busy man. You run a great website, Louder Than War. You're steeped in music. Where can we get copies of this book? Where's the best place to get it, I should ask?
Well, best to me is if you get it on my Bandcamp. So I've got them on the Membranes Bandcamp. That's my band. So if you Google Membranes Bandcamp, it's on the merch page, and they're signed as well. So, but it'll be obviously when it comes out, it's going to be in Amazon and all the shops. But you don't want to give Amazon all your money because they don't pay tax.
Really, really good to talk to you.
All right, Eamon, thanks a lot. Thanks for your time.
What we're gonna do right here is go back, way back into time. That's right. Name that tune. Get up, everybody. Name that tune.
Every now and then, normally when the world needs it most, a band manages to catch the cultural zeitgeist and create a new sound that resonates far beyond all expectations. So when Jason Williamson and Andrew Fearn came together as a Sleaford Mods, they managed not only to tap into the grim reality of austerity, but also into the long-since dormant spirit of punk. Their hyper-real blend of social commentary and ultra-raw rhythms saw them become the Marmite sensation of the noughties. And now, unbelievably more than a decade later, they continue to evolve their sound without losing any of their intensity. They're back with a new album called UK Grim, complete with a Cold War Steve-directed video. And the Sleaford Mods are back to inspire a little rebellion in us. And I'm very, very glad indeed to welcome Jason Williamson to the podcast. Hello, Jason.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very well. I'm very excited to speak to you. You've been a long-time target for the pod, I have to say.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, been stalking you from afar.
You finally snagged me, haven't
Yeah,
you?
exactly. Patience wins out in the end. What a funny old road it's been. It's like I say, you've been a long time target of the podcast. We really wanted to speak to you for ages, and I think when you sort of first popped up, you came at such an unusual angle to all the things that were going on at the time. And I know you yourself were, involved in music or trying to do stuff in music beforehand. Yeah. It must have been, I don't know, it must have been a strange sensation to finally find that thing that dug in and hooked and actually started to work for you, really pull you where you wanted to go.
Yeah, it gave me, it restored my faith back into life, and it made me realise that good things can happen sometimes. I was trying beyond all reason, in the sense of trying. I'd become obsessed with it, and but to the point where I couldn't quite figure out if I was still obsessed with it or if I just completely crashed and burned. Or I was in such a mess by the time I come up with a formula for it that yes, the eureka moment was a very nice feeling, and it lasted for a good week. But after that, it was business as usual, and trying then to work on it, to improve it, to establish it a bit better. And having my expectations smashed to smithereens again, and just becoming used to the process of failing again with it. So yes, it was a mixture of elation and again cold hard realism. After the honeymoon period wore off. You know what I mean?
Coming a little bit later than perhaps was planned. I'm sure you planned to be burned out by the time you were 25. But
well, this is another thing. This is what kind of not worried me, but I never took success seriously because of my age around that period. So I would set out to live this rather bizarre life of exercising along with copious drug intake and alcohol and cigarettes. But as long as I still looked physically like I was 26, I figured I could probably get away with it. That was my thinking. But obviously that's not a very good idea in hindsight. You know what I mean?
Well, I don't know. It's kind of the dream for many of us. I'm still waiting to be discovered by some mogul somewhere. So let's talk about some of the music that has inspired you along the way. Yeah. You picked out 3 tracks for us today to share your phonographic memories. And I've been listening to him this morning over breakfast. It's some great stuff. Yeah. The first one, Alex Cameron, End Is Nigh. It's such a lovely song. And it's funny because it's quite tender and it's quite downbeat. It's not screaming job seeker at me or anything like that. It's a soft song. But I tell you what, it does have something that you guys have too, which is this way of speaking. The lyrically, there's an ordinariness about some of the things they say. I find that really interesting. Tell us a bit about Alex Cameron and why you like this particular track. I discovered Alex Cameron on the European tour in 2019, just floating through Spotify trying to find something to listen to. And actually I discovered him via The Quietus. They'd run an article on his new album, Miami Memory, which is what this track is from. So I just started listening to it. Initially, I wasn't sure, and then I just started getting hooked to it. It's really kind of it's got that realness about it, that real creativeness about it. That he's completely into it. He's very passionate about it. He loves it. He wants to try and push his influences forward. Under the guise of his own abilities, which is how I got into it. I wanted to do something with my influences. I was so absorbed by what I was listening to that I had to recreate that in my own style. You know what I mean? So it reminded me of that, but also I connected to the fact that he has lots of
or did, have lots of issues with substance abuse and lots of other hang-ups, that I connected with as well. If you listen to the lyrics, they're quite dark. They're very dark, actually, and they're very sad. But they're also very romantic and full of melody, full of life.
Pleased to hear you coming to visit soon. Yeah, I'm glad to hear you coming through. I get the cabin ready for you and your girl. Yeah, the wife and kids will be here too. There's a guy who thinks I'm fucking his girlfriend. He says he's gonna make me cry, but I couldn't get it up if I wanted to, man, yeah, and I already wanna die. If the end is a night, baby, I don't think I wanna survive. If the end is a night, baby, make it swift and let me die.
I know him a little bit, and he is he doesn't lay shit on you. He's polite, he's funny, he's inclusive, so he's a real special talent, I think. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I was really impressed. It's not someone I've heard a lot of. Are you still finding yourself? I mean, perhaps even more so now, because with the success, I guess you've garnered a few people around you now who are making great music too, and although none of them, it's not like you have the same sound, but maybe there's the same ethos running through with people like yourselves and Dry Cleaning and Billy No Mates and all these others.
Sure.
You find yourself picking up a lot more of the sort of music that you're after now, or is it easier to find, or is it finding you?
It's kind of a bit of both, really. It's not easy to find because there's so much shit out there. It's just hard to. Sometimes I just can't be asked picking the spade up and clearing it away. You just have to just live with it, and then all of a sudden you'll come across something. A little nugget will peer out of this pool of just monotony, and it will initially be a little bit puzzling or not very good, and then it just clings to you. So. Yeah. Sometimes you find it, sometimes, but generally a lot of the time you have to go looking for it.
You seem to be good at bringing people into your fold though as well, I think there's, again, maybe this is something of being a bit older when it all takes off, is that I think when you're young, quite often it can be a bit of an arms race, a bit of a giant competition that you're looking over your shoulder, who else is good, damn it, I don't want anyone opening up for me who's going to blow me off the stage or whatever. And perhaps as you get a bit older, you're a bit more no, I like them, I'll have a bit of that,
Oh god, yeah, there is that, definitely.
I mean, you've assembled quite a few really good talented people that tour with you and stuff. That must be satisfying as well, just to be able to help those people along.
Well, so I mean, you don't want to come across like Mr. Fucking oh, look, come here, I can help you.
Yeah, I'm not insinuating you've got a fat cigar and a limo outside.
Completely, no, but it's like, but I'm not you, but I'm constantly aware that I don't want to, I mean, I think it's hard sometimes to reach out to other people because musicians they're quite singular in their thinking, and, the ones that are worth their weight in gold are very choosy, so you're always a bit tentative. But I think collaborating with people has transformed our fortunes for us. So I'm all for it, and I'm all for reaching out and trying to get to know people as much as you can in amongst people's busy lives. But yeah, I don't want to. I don't want to be Mr. Game Show host, and Andrew doesn't either. You don't want to. Hey, come on, blah blah blah, and you don't want to assume that people would want to work with you or want to support you either. You know,
you have yourselves had some amazing invites. You know, I mean, I can remember like waking up one day, opening up the paper and seeing, oh, Sleaford Mods recorded with the Prodigy. Wow!
Oh yes, yeah,
I mean,
yeah, fantastic.
That must be, you know, because you're roughly the same age as me, I think, and I think that must be one of those things where, because they're like a pillar, aren't they, in UK dance? They're like one of the things that holds the roof up.
Yes.
So, I mean, what happened? Did they just phone you up out of the blue, or was it?
It was actually just myself that collaborated with them. Andrew didn't come in on it, but it was I got an email off Liam Howlett's manager, and he was like, "Oh, do you want to? Would you be interested in sort of guesting with them?" And I said, "Yeah." So I started talking to Liam, and that was that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, great. It was too. And I do. My favourite one, I think, of the ones that I've heard you play with someone else, the stuff you did with the Bug, I thought was amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Like brilliant lyrical, and always, you know, Kevin Martin's production is just so powerful. It's incredible. Were you familiar with them beforehand, or was that just
a little bit? Yeah, he's obviously he's a cult. You know, he'd probably kill me for saying that. But it's a real. He's got a real cult following. And he languishes in his own world and refuses to play some crap commercial game. You know, so he's a lovely bloke as well. But yeah, those tunes are very powerful.
Yeah, they are. I mean, they're huge, and the bigger the system, the more powerful they get. So, yeah, it's great stuff to hear. Let's move on to your second choice, which is completely at the opposite end of that. There's no massive sub bass running through this. You chose a track by Aldous Harding called Treasure, which I thought was really beautiful, actually. I listened to it 3 times this morning. It's a really nice track. How did this one come into your life?
We played a festival in Tasmania in 2020, and she played just before us, or sort of earlier in the day. And I was quite captivated by it. Like, I don't know. I'm not one of those. I'm quite cynical when it comes to watching bands live. You know, I'm not into this. I saw someone and it was brilliant bullshit, because a lot of the time you haven't really got an opinion. You walk away, and then for some reason you start listening to them. And so when I watched her, I was quite captivated. It was like, oh dear, you know. And then I met her after, and I started listening to her album Designer after that. And this tune reminds me of Lockdown, being strung out because I had a sciatica problem, I had a back problem. So I was strung out on all these painkillers in my daughter's bed, right at the top of the house. It reminds me of that, really. I used to listen to the album to send me to sleep. And we kept in touch, and I did a little bit of backing vocals on one of the songs from her last album. Again, you know, a very similar connection to that of Alex, in the sense of she is completely dedicated to creating music that she loves, but under her own guise, you know. So again, another brilliant musician, and a little bit of a friend. You know what I mean?
Oh, that's lovely.
I made it again to the Amazon. I've got a race the same as the others, and I see it far cleaner than that. Expecting to be ready for 3. I just stood up, and I mean it, I have better than that.
One of the things that really struck me about the Sleaford Mods from the first time I ever saw you on some YouTube clip or whatever was just the fact that you just threw it all away. Do you know what I mean? There's that brilliant quote from Noel Gallagher, I think you put on the back of your book, where you say, you know, pop stars can't drive around in a gold Rolls Royce anymore because some cunt from the Sleaford Mods said it was shit.
What does he think? I mean, what's he on? It's
so brilliant because it perfectly illustrates him and you. Do you know what I mean? It's like,
God, yeah.
When someone throws an insult out, and then you actually think, I don't know who came the worst out of that. You know, maybe you just blew your foot off. But
I think, I just think it was a bit. I don't know. You know, I mean,
that's his game, isn't it?
It's a tough one with that geezer, really. You know what I mean? But he is kind of out of time, really, in a lot of respects.
But I guess my point was that you know, you deliberately have decided just not to fucking deal with any of that. You know, you're not about to show up in glitter pants and have a major light show. And we're not gonna have Andrew knocking out a 5-minute drum solo in the middle of your concert. You know, like I love the way you just stripped all that away. And you know, for me, and I think for a lot of people, the overriding feeling was that of punk. You know, it felt like you were just tearing down all the trappings of success and all the expectations that come with the music business, and actually getting it back to really what kind of folk music is about, if you like, you know, which is like, you know, telling the news and, you know, expressing what's going on in your life today. Was that a really conscious decision to try and throw that away, or was it just something that you were just sick of seeing this banal parade of riches?
Yeah, it got too much. It was you know, we were inundated with these bands that were doing the same rustic fucking Neil Young kind of, you know, like sort of Small Faces, kind of early 70s rock type stuff, you know, Small Faces R&B mod type stuff. All of that was just so, it was rinsed out, you know.
Yeah.
And some of the people that ushered that kind of sound in, early Oasis, Paul Weller, you know, did it very well, I think. Not so much Oasis, they were a little bit more kind of contemporary, but, you know, Paul Weller really did try and dive in and try and recreate these old sounds, and kind of brought that to the forefront a little bit, which I thought was interesting, you know, and good, and I still listen to that. But then it got saturated with acts in a similar vein, and I just got sick of it. Trying to do it myself, and then ended up really resenting it and hating at the same time the idea of X Factor, which had just come in and was starting to take over. So the initial idea was to do it live, but like do it like X Factor, as almost a 2 fingers up to X Factor. But at the same time, you know, recognising that I just didn't like this full band, this you know, this kind of like traditional band setup anymore. You know what I mean?
I can remember watching you appear on Jules Holland, and reading the Twitter feed at the time, and it was just hilarious because obviously you know you had loads of people who were banging into what you do. You couldn't believe you were on national TV, you know, on a Friday night or whatever, and then you had all this sort of comfy slippers brigade across the country who just did not know what to do with Andrew stood by a computer. Yeah,
it was. We still get it. You know what I mean? It's still a bit. You know, people just won't have it. You know what I mean? Which is nice. It's nice to see that. You know, you're doing something right. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because I mean, and the other thing is, you know, the way your music especially comes out, and I think perhaps not enough focus sometimes is on Andrew's work because, you know.
No.
From the very beginning, obviously your lyrics are fantastic and the delivery is brilliant, but you need something to sit that on. And I think some of the very earliest things I heard were kind of perhaps more like hip-hop loops, what you might expect. And then suddenly this style develops, which, you know, the only thing, I think it's much more punk than hip-hop because there's just something kind of, but then again, you know, I guess actually thinking about it, you know, the real most sincere hip hop is totally punk because it is totally DIY. It was literally let's grab 2 copies of the same record and make some noise over the top of it. But what Andrew has managed to do is create these ultra minimal like blasts of sound basically, which so complement what you're doing. But the interesting thing is it's not it's not like any other thing that was around at the time. It really wasn't an aping of another style. I mean, it's kind of a stupid question, but where do you think that came from?
Well, Andrew's is the absolute. It's the jacket that goes around it, and the trousers as well. Do you know what I mean? And the shoes, actually. You know what I mean? It's like, you know, my content is in the centre. You know, it beats away the heart of it, I guess. But he just, without, you know, I did 4 albums on my own before I met him, just using, as you say, loops from hip hop records and punk records. And I was aware that this was an approach that has been done time and time again, and I knew it didn't have a future, and I wanted something more homegrown. So when I met Andrew, and immediately clicked onto his style of music, you know, we grew it from there. But you know, his influences aren't necessarily music; it's sounds from a TV program or something that he hears outside, and he likes to duplicate that. Sure, he listens to music. Of course, there is an influence from various whatever genres he listens to, but you know, he doesn't want to recreate a sound he's heard so much. More his interpretation of it, and that can be anything, you know.
Yeah, totally. I think one of them, I touched on it a little bit in the intro, which is, you know, I was just looking over doing what everyone does in a podcast. I read your Wikipedia page. I did a bit more than that, but I did read your Wikipedia page. But, you know, what kind of really set me thinking was, you know, 10 years plus have gone by now, you know what I mean? And it's just grown and grown and grown and grown in a way that I'm sure even you have to pinch yourself occasionally and just go, wow, how did I get here? But
completely, yeah.
Given the restraints of what you had in the first place, which was these, you know, when you listen back to Divide and Exit, a lot of those, I mean, it's literally like 16 bars. I just doubled up. You know, it's so raw. There's no fills. There's, you know, it was really like thrash it out and stick it on the laptop and away you go. And I think what's really interesting as well now is that all this time has gone by and the sound has evolved and become perhaps a bigger thing altogether, but you haven't ever been tempted down the route of overcomplicating it. Is that something you're really aware of? Because it seems to be at the essence of what made you good in the first place. Yeah,
I mean, Andrew, like I say, you know, he steers the future of it. It's destiny. Not his destiny, but you know, he maps it out by simply doing music and sending it over. Yeah. That music will be manipulated a little bit in the studio, maybe. There might be a few other bits added to it, but what he sends over initially is what you've got, and it's all down to his psychology with it. You know, he's a minimalist. We both are. We don't want too much fuss on the record, audio-wise. We don't want to be listening to too much fuss, too much clutter, and it doesn't also need to take too long to do. I mean, if both of those things are evident, then we tend to lose interest. You know what I mean? Yeah,
definitely. Is that how it works then? He'll just send you a loop out of the blue, and you'll pick it up and see what you can do with it.
Yeah, basically, it'll send me 4, 5, 6 loops at a time. And you know, most of them, all of them, I'll use, and the idea is to not leave any hole. I forgot what the saying is there, but like, you know what I mean. You just don't leave anything to chance and just do everything. Yeah. And some of them work, some of them don't. Yeah, I think we did probably about 35 songs for this new album, and obviously. Well, I say that about 25, 26 actually, sorry. And then, you know, obviously 14 of them made it onto the album, you know.
Yeah, I've just thought to myself, what a lovely idea this is, that, you know, him sending you those beats and stuff. You two are kind of like the reverse image of Elton John and Bernie Taupin. Because Bernie would just send a little poem or something and Elton would bash it out. Like, you guys are like the devil's version. I love it. I think one thing that probably hasn't been talked about enough, as far as I'm concerned, is you know, you come inspired from hip hop, and your last choice, Raekwon, Inspector Deck, Ghostface Killer, The Guillotine from Only Built for Cuban Links. I mean, absolutely tremendous music. And, you know, when I talked earlier about the sort of the early Sleaford Mods stuff that I heard that did have that kind of recognisable hip-hop sound in it as well, you know, that obviously had a big impact on you, because hip-hop, was that always something you were into, or is that something that kind of came through later in the 90s and stuff?
I was always into it from sort of the Def Jam era, sort of late 80s. I think it was sort of 87, 88 when Public Enemy, 87 I think, when Public Enemy released Yo Bum Rush's Show, and that's when it started. LL Cool J with Bigger and Deffer, it came out roughly around the same time. So I was into that kind of explosion, that kind of was it a second wave? I don't know. It was kind of the first wave. You had your disco hip hop from sort of the early, way back early 80s or whatever, late 70s. But this is when it really started to take shape, sort of thing, for me anyway. So and then I lost interest, and then around 2000, about 2005, 2004. I started to listen to the Wu-Tang Clan, and then that's when it really opened up. You know, the mafioso gangster rap of the East Coast, Cool G rap as well. You know, all that old kind of stuff. 91, I think Cool G rap was more so, but then the Wu-Tang Clan with Enter the 36 Wu-Tang Chambers, and that changed everything for me. In the sense of how to approach vocals, and also I would imagine was responsible for the minimalist approach as well, because obviously there was, as much as Wu-Tang's quite busy when you listen to it, it's kind of not at the same time, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it's delivered in chunks, isn't it? They get a sample out.
Yeah, yes,
especially on the early albums where, you know, there's a lot of, you know, it's like they take a loop and fly with it. Do you know what I mean? They don't spend a lot of time. Maybe in the later albums you hear a little bit more of this kind of world building. But it definitely had that vibe for it. Would you? I was trying whether to ask this or not, but you know, I remember reading about Beck many years ago after he did Loser and all that sort of thing. And him just saying, someone in an interview said, blah blah blah. Do you think you're part of the hip hop scene? And he's going, "Oh God, don't call it hip hop. they kill me." You know, I mean, he just got so much shit about it. He actually just refused to talk about it anymore.
Oh, did he? Did he get much shit about it?
Yeah, because you know, he was a skinny white kid with sitars and a breakbeat, and he was sort of rapping, I guess. But, you know, to me, they were always songs, really. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, I think there was this kind of thing, here's this sort of new angle on hip-hop. And the hip-hop heads in America certainly did not like that at all. And they,
Fuck, I didn't know that. Shit.
they got quite shitty about it. Would you describe yourself as a hip-hop act? Or is that pushing things too far?
Absolutely not. I think, you know, we're punk rock, basically.
Yeah, that's what I'd put you there.
But obviously there is a bit of an influence from rap, but I was always very careful to not do that, because it was so off-putting watching people around here try to be rappers like that, because most of them were doing it in an American voice.
Yes.
And the ones that weren't were doing it in this terrible kind of, there was no flow, no soul to it. And as I kind of like studied all of the rappers from Wu-Tang, you know, a lot of them were shouting, really. It was like, there was rhyme in there, but the words would only rhyme every 5 or 6 sentences.
Yeah.
For some reason, you know, they just walked along the beat, you know. So it was like, I thought, I'm going to try and do that. And because of that, and because I was so cautious of not being hip-hoppy, it came out the way it did. But at the same time, I was listening to a lot of punk stuff. So the two things combined, you know.
Allow me to demonstrate the skill of Shaolin. The special technique of shadow boxing.
Poisonous. Slap all y'all niggas for coming in my fucking face with that shit.
poisonous. Poisonous paragraph, smash your phonograph in half and be the Inspector Jack on the warpath. First class, leaving mics with a cast, causing ruckus like the aftermath when guns blast. Run fast, here comes the verbal assaulter. Rhymes running wild like a child in a walker. I scored from the inner slums abroad, and my thoughts are razor sharp. I slice the mic from the cord. First criticized, but now they have become mentally paralyzed with hits that I devise. Now I testify, the best is I, rebel lioness, your highness, blessed to electrify, provoke you to for ill. Truth that I reveal across the amateurs who scream, they keep it real. G's are black down, hoodied up in fatigue. Part-time minor leagues receive third degrees. Attack like a wolf pack. Once I pull back, the guard you and bust through like a fullback. Yo, you 14-karat gold slump.
Well, yeah, when you think about it, you know, hip hop and punk are very similar in many ways, and in fact, of course, Malcolm McLaren had a hand in bringing both of them to England. You know what I mean?
Yes,
so
sure.
He brought all that sound over first, and certainly the first time I ever saw anyone scratch a record was, I think it was on Nationwide or some Southeastern Six type show. But it has the same aesthetic, but they've morphed into such different worlds. And I can remember I did a review for Divide and Exit, and I think the week before you'd been in some interview and you'd mentioned thanks to the fans for buying the records because it's paid for the new patio doors. And I thought, that is real hip hop. Do you know what I mean? We're not talking about some diamond encrusted tracksuit here. We're talking about the man needs new patio doors. That's as real as it
did. I can remember. I can remember it as well. And they were a godsend. You know?
Are they still standing?
Well, we've actually moved from that house.
To the mansion on the hill.
Yes. So compared to the last one, yeah, it definitely is. You know what I mean?
Excellent. Well, it's been a long road for you now, and like I say, how many years is it? 2007 you started, wasn't it? So
yeah.
And Andrew didn't come on board for a couple of years, did he? No.
He didn't. No, I started in 2000. I released the first CDR in 2006, I believe, right. And he didn't come on board until 2011.
Right, so it's quite a long time, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you sum up how it's been to come from essentially, I imagine, sat in your bedroom with a loop of some kind, writing down words in a pad, all the way to where you are now, having published books, funny books as well, amazing books, I have to say, really, really good.
Thank you.
But it's all come together. Weird. What's it been like?
It's been very. Feels like years and years ago, those old early gigs. Yeah. And I've got so many memories of them. But at the same time, lots of hard work and, periods of where's it going, what we're going to do with it. And
have you felt on top of it all the time, or did you? There must have been a point after the initial flood where you thought, "Oh God, now I've got to do another one." Do you know?
No, there was never that. I relished the idea of that. It's just we, towards it, we had an initial manager who was with us from the start, but by 2018 it was clear that it wasn't working, and that because we'd entrusted so much into his position. He was effectively steering the ship, but it was clear that he couldn't do that anymore. So it was making the transition from parting ways with him, trying to mend all of because I think there was a lot of damage, there was a lot of unsurety, a bit of uncertainty in the sense of mine and Andrew's relationship. We never talked. It just wasn't like that. So. We had to then start a new relationship, me and Andrew, so to speak, and we were fortunate enough to have, my wife was helping out our old manager a lot, and she took over as temporary manager when we parted company with him, and that has remained. She's completely transformed it. Really, you need that, because if you haven't got a decent manager, you're fucked. I think you can't do those things on your own. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and there's something about separating. I've been in bands and I DJ and all that sort of stuff, and by far my most dreaded thing to do is to write that email to some venue I haven't talked to before and try and get that gig. Do you know what I mean? That can be soul destroying. I think
you ain't got the time, so I don't want to do that.
Yeah, totally. And also it's a drag from your art. Do you know what I mean? It takes away from what you love it for. So
sure.
Having someone able to bring that out, and I think as well, it's certainly nice. Although you did the albums with Rough Trade and stuff, you also a lot of it's been you and your mates pulling together and actually getting stuff out. That's impressive.
Yeah, well, it was all the way up until Key Markets, and then we signed with, which was the third album me and Andrew had done, fourth album, and then we signed with Rough Trade, did English Tap House. Then we left Rough Trade under the advice of our old manager. It turned out to be an absolute disaster. And that's when Claire came in and oversaw the release of Eaten Alive. But she did wonders with it. It went to number 9, our first top 10 album.
Amazing.
After that we re-signed back to Rough Trade. It was clear that it was a label we should stay with. And, thankfully they accepted us back, because it was a fuck around. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So. And the rest has been so far so good. We've released what critically are strongest albums to date. I think Spare Ribs and the new one, UK Grim, are clear signs of it, changing and moving in other directions. You know what I mean?
I think just before we wrap up, one thing that I think we talked a little bit about Noel Gallagher and his penchant for a good quote. And you're a man who's good for a quote. Let's be honest. But what I was thinking is, I'm also what my mother would call someone with a lot to say. I tend to shoot from the hip. Now, you strike me as the type of guy who talks from the hip all the time. But there must have been a time when no one fucking listened to that, and then suddenly people start writing it down. And quoting you on Twitter messages and all that. What was that like? And how have you managed to deal with the fact that if you say something now, you can't just throw it away, like you used to be able to do? Do you know what I mean? That must be quite tricky sometimes.
I mean, I don't know. It was just really weird. Getting the attention was just really weird.
Yeah.
People were just like, "This is getting really weird, Jason." And I'm like, yeah, because people just didn't expect me to get anywhere. I didn't expect to get anywhere. It was I think most people had given up on me. I'd given up on me. I bet the only person that tried to resuscitate me was my wife, who I'd met around 2010. So, I don't know. It's just fucking weird. You can't put things happen, don't they?
Yes.
And life is like that. Things happen. Sometimes they're not very nice, and a lot of the time they're good if you're attentive to the rhythms of your life. So I don't know.
Did you find yourself weird. Self-censoring now and thinking, oh, maybe I shouldn't?
Of course, you got to self-censor a little bit, because you just get cancelled, wouldn't you? It's like fucking hell. I think
if they were going to cancel you, you'd have been cancelled long ago.
Well, I mean, it's that thing where I said on Twitter ages ago, in the future everyone will be cancelled for 15 minutes. You know what I mean?
See, I told you you're good for a quote, didn't I?
No, but also Twitter's so good like that. If you've got that kind of, if you've got that, if you like doing shit like that, then Twitter's perfect.
Absolutely,
it still is, I think. It still is, even though it's a bit of a mess now.
Old Space Karen's kind of. He's spent all his money on something and then taken a big dump on top of it. I don't know why he's done that, but there you go.
There you go.
We left it. Hey, listen, Jason, it's been so great to talk to you. I'm really pleased to have finally got you on the pod, and I wish you all the success for UK Grim. I've followed your rise, and it's been inspiring and a joy, very funny, and really exciting as well. I think when I watched the movie that they made about you.
Oh right, yeah.
And it culminated in that scene where you're kind of backstage at Rock City or wherever, And you can just hear the crowd doing "oh" from that must be, that's everything you kind of want in the world, really, right there on a plate. So I think fully deserved to the pair of you, and thank you so much for your time and for the great music you've given us over the last 10 so years.
Thank you very much.
Okay, have a great day, Jason.
Nice to meet you. Yeah, all right, you take care.
Nice one, mate. Cheers.
Ta-da. Ta-da.
Dear listeners, for God's sake, we've done 50 of these episodes now. Like us and subscribe us. I don't want to be pushy, but what are you here for?
The big sigh was what really made that at the beginning, Eamon. You're making Eamon sigh. Would you ever just like and subscribe?
Help a brother out.
There's a guy who thinks I'm fucking his girlfriend. He says he's gonna make me cry, but I couldn't get it up if I wanted to, man, yeah, and I already wanna die. If the end is a night, baby, I don't think I wanna survive.